There it goes. Welcome, everyone. Another edition of AI Insights. Software guru, AI expert Stephen Bowman, and myself, Mike Russell. Today, what about tools being used to improve tools? Now, that's sort of, I mean, if you get into the philosophy of this, it can get, redundancy and there's all sorts of things, especially from a programming standpoint about recombinant. But anyway, well, I'm going down another rabbit hole. Anyway, the idea is here, well, what about that, particularly with AI? Because if you think about tools to improve tools or tools to do work, even what from a software, since we got a software expert here, one of the things that most software professionals do if they're doing something new or doing something with a new language or a new domain, typically one of the first things they do is build some tools to help them do the work, right? So we've been talking about that in a sense with ChatGPT and all these others, the idea of guide on the side, of using AI tools to help you do your work. But now this is something different. This is the tool working on other tools or working on itself. So that along with some news of the day, why don't we start there, Stephen? And you've got a story that's a non-technology story. Well, actually it is technology in a sense, but non-software, non-AI. We'll start with that.
Excellent. But Mike, welcome. Thank you. Glad to be here with you today. Very appreciative of your time. So I read an article. I'm doing some work in my own business, which is an AI agent-based business, and um, it pulled me right back to when I first understood what my grandfather did in his trade and profession. And this is an ode to my grandfather. Pop, I hope you're listening. I love you. Hope you're doing well. So my grandfather was a journeyman tool and die maker, a card-carrying journeyman, a 7-year apprenticeship tool and die maker. What does that mean? What does that actually mean? So um, I grew up in Detroit, the Detroit area, the outskirts. He worked for a company that used high pressure plastic injection molds to make all kinds of components, primarily for automotive, but door handles and steering wheels and gear
Right.
shifters
Yeah.
and dashboards and all the kinds of stuff that we just kind of take for granted and don't ever really think, well, where did that come from? Well, there was a machine out there somewhere that had to do that magic. There's nobody out there with a chisel carving plastic, right? So as a machine that created these objects, they had to be built, they had to be worked on, they had to be fixed. And a lot of them had very complicated moving parts, and sometimes those parts would break. And you couldn't exactly just call the manufacturer and say, hey, can I get a widget from the inside of the whatnot on the fly? It just didn't happen. And when the machines didn't work, the employees who ran the machines didn't work. There was no production, a production facility, manufacturing facility. Everything ground to a halt. So stakes are really high, pressure is really high. And sometimes he had to manufacture parts or tools, actually manufacturing tools to work on the machines to fix them so that they could be back in order to make the stuff that everybody consumed further downstream. So it really got me thinking about those principles when I work on my tools. So first and foremost, the very first example, obviously this is about AI because this is an AI podcast, but using AI to help you create your prompt. Literally
Right.
putting in all of the information that you've got and then asking your favorite engine, Claude, ChatGPT, whomever, hey, I need a prompt that will produce this result, and here's all of my input. Help! And it will. I guarantee you it will. You can set it up ahead of time and tell it you're an expert prompt engineer. You can ask it, one of my favorite things to do, you'll hear me talk about this over and over and over again. Whatever additional questions you need to ask me before you produce results, go ahead and ask, do them one at a time, interview style. By the way, you can write that in every single prompt, or you can add that in your custom instructions. That'll be a conversation for another day. If you want to know how this AI, and we're talking about how to make AI help AI work better, you can ask AI, hey, how do I add custom instructions so that every time I ask you to do something, you ask me questions before you go and do it? And it'll tell you exactly what to do, where to go, and where to enter that information. I highly recommend it. If that went over your head, send me a question, no problem.
Yeah, well, the main thing about that is because of that natural language interface, as opposed to trying to read a manual or something else, if you don't know how to do something, you can ask it to tell you how to do something. Right? That's
Exactly.
the fundamental thing, right? I mean, you don't have to go searching around. The easiest thing is just to use ChatGPT or Claude or, any
See,
Perplexity, any of them, just say, how do I do this? Right?
yep.
Or how do I, get to this point or whatever, and you can get some feedback and you can continue asking questions until you find out. Much better than looking at page 128, table B, of a manual, assuming you even find that table B was buried in the back.
Conversational, and more importantly, and this is something that I've explained to a lot of people, it's contextual. So here's exactly what I mean by contextual. You can ask AI, let's say you've got that training manual, and for the subject matter of what we're talking about here, right? We can use the word chatbot, we can use the word AI agent, we can use the word digital assistant, right? Maybe each one of those are used differently, slightly, but they all basically mean the same thing. I'm going to work with a piece of software that acts like a human being, and I can
Mhm.
converse with it. So if I've got a text-based PDF manual, I'm the kind of guy who I'm going to hit Control F, and I'm going to find in that document, I'm a Windows guy, as everybody just found out, Control F, right? I'm going to type my keyword into that document. And let's say I look up the keyword AI agent, because that's what I'm looking for. But in the documentation, whoever wrote it calls them a chatbot instead.
Exactly.
I won't find the keyword chatbot when I type in the keyword AI agent, but AI knows contextually that an AI agent is a chatbot, is a digital assistant. That's one of the huge advantages because it uses common language and because it's conversational in nature.
Yeah, it's a perfect illustration. I lost track. I don't even know how many times I've used the search bar in something, and because I didn't use the correct term, like you said, or close enough to the correct term nowadays. But it used to be you had to have the exact search term. If you didn't have the exact search term, you wouldn't find it.
Yeah, exactly. If there's any podcasters out there listening right now, I've got I've got some help for you. Contextual search, hit me up. Shameless plug. I've been working on a product for podcasters for this podcast, as a matter of fact. Story for another day. We'll do a demo on that next week or the week after. Good stuff. So in software development, we use AI to make our software better all the time. You guys might have heard me talk about Microsoft Copilot, um, maybe just using ChatGPT by itself or a custom GPT. We use it to generate JSON. I won't bother you with what the details of that are, but it is very important to me as a software developer and to my crew, the people who support the crazy ideas that I have, to use AI to sharpen and even to build new construct that we didn't think of, because we're humans and we're fallible and we can only remember so much. And those digital entities, those large language models, remember, well, pretty much everything that they've got indexed, which is a lot more than we can hold. So um, the other the other way to use AI as a tool, and this is really at the crux of what I wanted to talk about today. I've talked about it before now. I'm going to try to use slightly different language, but reiterate the same point. And that is, right, last week we talked about data management and how important data is, clean data, data that you've got access to for the future of how you're going to use AI. Well, data management, a big part of data management is how you input new data or accept new data.
Mhm.
And What I mean by this is using AI systems that have a feedback loop. Whether that, you'll notice, we've talked about this before, at the bottom of your, let's say, ChatGPT prompt window, when it gives you back a result, there's two little icons. It's a thumbs up and a thumbs down. Those matter. You're providing feedback to them when you hit one of those. When you say, this answer stinks, it knows that that's a thumbs down. When you keep asking questions and you say, great, thank you, it knows that that's a thumbs up. So it's constantly training itself. Now, obviously, we don't have these huge LLMs. We don't have all of this data. But the data that we do have and the data that we do capture is extremely important to capture it, keep it, and feed it back into the AI system that you pulled it from to improve your results in the future. I'll give you one perfect example and then probably time to move on. So right now we're building, we've already got it built, and we're getting really good responses regarding a pre-qualified appointment setting AI agent. So candidate businesses that I'm working with rely on leads, and they've got a fair amount of traffic. And what's happening is maybe 40 or 50% of the time, people are filling out a form, answering questions, and then booking an appointment. They don't get scared off. They actually book that appointment.
Right.
When the proprietor of the business is on this appointment, they're asking themselves, wow, how did this person make it onto my calendar for this time? They're not qualified. They're not ready to buy. They're not at a point in their customer journey where it makes sense for us to have this conversation. And there's a lot of time wasted. So what we're doing is we've created a mechanism that allows our AI agent that performs the questions to evaluate whether we send them to a web page or whether we send them to a YouTube channel or whether we send them to book an appointment because they're superly, right, they're ready to buy, they're highly qualified. We're split testing the questions that we ask. And every 100 iterations, we're taking the answers, the responses, and what the statistics were on how many people answered all of these questions and where they got routed to, how many, right? We're determining a winner and a loser just like you would in advertising, just like you would in any other split test. And we're throwing out the loser. We're packaging all that data. We're handing it back to AI and we're saying, generate new questions. And we're having a competition between what questions are working and what aren't, with the kicker here being a scoring system on the back end by the business owner. Everybody who sits in front of them, they go back and they mark 1 through 5, 1 star through 5 stars. Was this a good meeting or not? Were they qualified or not? And the reason why is because we can convince ourselves of whatever we want until after we have to spend a half an hour with somebody who isn't ready, isn't in a position to actually work with us. So by getting data and feeding data back into the system, we're using the tools to improve the tools. That's part of why this is so important right now. AI is the new models, in particular the 4.0 model from ChatGPT that we're working with, not the mini. We've had some trouble with the mini. The 4.0 model has really advanced forward for us our ability to throw more, dare we say, complex evaluations at it. We don't have to have hard-coded questions and answers like you would in type form, like you would in a multiple choice question. Instead, it evaluates the answers and decides this is a good candidate or not. And then we help it understand where we want to send them instead. And that feedback loop on data, on what worked, on what didn't, on what got the best results, help us guarantee lead quality improvement over time. And that's really
So
meaningful.
what, roughly speaking, what are the proportions when you started this of good lead versus oh, not bad lead, but I mean, not an appropriate lead. Well, that's a better term, appropriate versus inappropriate for them to talk to. And after you've done some training, has it been like 1 in 5 was appropriate at the beginning, and now it's 3 in 5? I mean, what kind of just rough ratios?
Yeah, sure, sure. So what we're seeing is when we sat down and talked to them initially, they said, oh, it's about 50-50. So that's where we marked our watermark, right? That was our baseline.
So
But
half of the leads that you had, they had appointments because I mean, normally the consideration is if somebody fills out all the stuff and says they want an appointment, the assumption is that it's an appropriate lead, but that's not necessarily the case, right? That's the
not
whole point
necessarily
of
the
doing
case.
this other line, all right? So 1 out of 2, which means every other meeting, in a sense, was a waste. Was it now?
Every other meeting not only was a waste, but what they felt like they were having to do was kind of what we call jazz hands, right?
Oh yeah, right, yeah,
Dance
right.
on the fly with how do I save this time or how do I make something out of nothing here, et cetera, right? Very energy draining. And what we found is that in all actuality, once they started scoring from the initial questions that they had, we found that it was closer to 35% appropriate. It was
All
even
right, so
lower than they reported. And
about
what we're
one in
seeing
three.
by one
Okay.
in three, exactly. What we're seeing now is we're seeing a 15 to 20% increase in their scoring month over month. They're literally the quality of the appointments is getting better and better and better by 15 to 20% every 30 days.
Okay.
Big improvement for them. The people who are using it are pretty darn happy with it. And we're really happy because they're happy.
Right.
We're using it's the tool to help the tool, right? It's the happiness to help the happiness.
Right. Well, just after 2 months, then instead of 1 out of 3, you'd go to 2 out of 3, which
Yep.
flips the equation. It gets harder after that, but
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
for sure. No, we're thrilled with it. We're using it ourselves. We're dog
Yeah,
fooding.
there
So
you go. All right.
yeah, our results aren't as good because our qualification questions are not as stringent, but they're getting there. So
Right. Well, this is this is probably something for another day as well, but it's probably also interesting seeing what questions are the real determinants as opposed to some that you might think, right? Because I might think, oh, this particular question about, revenue per product or something is the real determinant when actually it's not.
sure,
It makes somebody a good candidate. So I would think that's also important because if it comes down to that, just as a, little end note, side note to this is that if you don't have much time, let's say I'm at a convention association meeting or something, it's a typical meet and greet, you only got maybe a minute with a person or, not much more
yes,
unless, they're interested. So that would mean if once you narrow it down and find out what is 80/20, right? The topmost question, that would be the one you'd lead with somehow, right?
sure. To your point, absolutely. Um, So one of the questions that we've found, we not only do we measure questions, answers, et cetera, we also keep track of when somebody stops answering questions. We it's an
Right.
assumption, but it's funny how when we get to the point where we ask, do you have an allocated budget of X dollars? They don't answer that question and they bail from the session. The other thing that we put in again, we talk about data management. I'm really big on data management. Um, we ask immediately for contact information, email addresses. And when we first started, I was able to put in, steve@cat.com.
Right.
And now we've got a mechanism that an AI agent that looks at the email address and determines if it's suspect or not. If it looks suspect, before the agent continues, it goes and runs a query to a mail provider to determine whether or not that email address if the domain that they entered, it's nerdy details. Is it a valid email address or not?
Yeah,
Anybody
yeah.
wants to know the kind of
You're
stuff?
basically you're cleaning No, that's the wrong way to say it. You're performing your own last line of defense against spam
Exactly.
and other
Exactly.
stuff, right? That's what it
So
really comes down to.
we then turn around because it's conversational and we say, I'm sorry, that email address looks a little suspect. Could you please enter the 6-digit verification code that was sent to that address or enter another valid email address? And you'd be shocked how many times we get a second email address that is not steve@cat.com. I'll just leave it there.
Right.
So again, another good implementation of data management, making sure that the data that we're getting is valid, and that if you're going to get to that stage, that you're a qualified candidate that really has skin in the game, and that's the first barrier to entry right there. So good stuff. Really
Cool.
happy with good stuff. Yeah.
All right. Now, let's see. News items. I think you had one about a follow-on to this. No, so this is, we were talking about, in a sense, us using the tool to improve the tool or laying out the way that we want the tool to improve itself. Now you've got a news article about the tool just improving itself on its own, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
which is that's kind of the grit the teeth and say, what?
yeah, this one's interesting. It's labeled self-improving AI nears reality. There is a tool out there, an implementation out there that's called the AI Scientist that performs autonomous research. It'll actually go and perform its own research. So the research that it's doing is finding ways to improve itself. A self-improving autonomous research assistant. And then there's checks and balances to where it actually goes and implements the research that it finds to improve itself. Um,
Checks and balances for what exactly? I mean, why
um,
just to keep it within what kind of bounds? I mean, is this the safety thing to keep it from, coming after humans? I just
right,
that's the
right now, it's a safety thing and it requires augmentation, which means a human being has to approve the new changes to the prompt that runs the tool that then goes and does its own research for how to make itself better.
Okay, so I feel compelled to ask this question. Has there been an instance of where it wasn't forthright in saying what it wanted to do to get approval?
That I don't know. It's a great question, though.
That would concern me. That would be, okay, all right, now I got a problem.
So one of the big reasons why this caught my attention is we talk about it every now and again. I know we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and that is that, and there's been a lot of noise in the news about this, right? The CEO of Anthropic came out and said AGI is going to be here next year, and Sam Altman has his 5 steps to AGI, which we'll get back to here in just one second. That's why it's important. But Sam Altman just came out 2 or 3 days ago and said AGI will probably be here within the next couple of years, and chances are good you won't even notice, which we'll
Well,
get
that's
back
an
to that
interesting
in
wrinkle.
the next news story. But the reason why I bring that up here is because remember the 5 layers of AGI, right? First, it was chatbots, and that was ChatGPT. And then there were reasoners, which was just released in the 4.0 model that we just discussed, right? The ability to reason and think more like humans. The next layer is AI agents. I'm doing that for a living. Step number 4 are innovators. Tools, in my mind, I'll define innovator as tools that can come up with creative innovations to fix just about anything, maybe even fix themselves or improve themselves, just like Sakana's AI scientist that we're talking about right here. It's an innovator right here, right now. It has the technology to go and perform research to innovate on new ideas and to implement them. Right now, we've got a little firewall in there where a human being has to say yes, but in no time flat, those innovators will be coming up with new, creative, and different ideas. Whether humans have thought about them or not is totally irrelevant. They're going to come up with those innovations and implement them in a cycle on their own. Rapid improvement in models, whatever it is that they're working on, processes, etc. That, again, level 5 are fully autonomous businesses. Those are businesses that run, maybe you've got a $500 million company with one employee, and that's the human CEO, who lets robots do everything else. We're rapidly approaching that. Seeing a story like this tells me that even though it's not, even though it's not mainstream, the innovators are here already. And it might be a specialized model, and it might be specialized prompting, and it might be a specialized data set, and it might be all three of those very specialized in its tiny little environment. But you know that that's going to grow and explode, because the limitations that humans put on ideas are not the limitations that AI puts on their ideas.
Okay. And so Sam Altman, who is open AI related, just for those who don't know, he says that we're not going to notice that
Yes.
AGI is going to be here. What is it? I mean, AGI coming is prediction, all right, that's one thing, that here or there, but we're not going to notice it. What's that about?
Feeds right into the next story. Thank you. Excellent segue. That feeds into the idea that OpenAI just purchased a domain. Think to yourself, what's the big deal? Well, the domain is a 4-letter domain, 4-letter word domain, which in today's world makes it really expensive. And it turns out that it's he bought it from HubSpot's co-founder. And the name of the domain is chat, C-H-A-T, chat.com. And you might think to yourself, oh, that's no big deal. ChatGPT, chat.com. He paid more than $15 million for it, first and foremost. Next on the agenda is, I think it is very clearly a signal of where he sees all of the technology that he's the poster child for going. AI is conversational. It's nothing but a chat. You're chatting with what feels like a human. It's a software program, and that is only going to get further and deeper. Now, when he said AGI is going to happen and you won't notice, it's because I believe it is going to be absolutely ubiquitous. It's going to be in every single software platform. It's going to be on your phone. It's going to be on your Alexa at home. It's going to be on a keychain around your neck. It's going to be everywhere. And because of the ubiquity of AI blending into the background, into all of the tools, it's in your car, it's in the bus, it's at the bus station, it's in the plane that you took, it's self-driving vehicles, all of it, right? Because it's going to be ingrained in everything that we do, including the robot that's standing at your kitchen sink washing dishes. Nobody's even going to realize that AGI has actually come and gone.
Okay.
That's my belief. That's what I see happening. And
so it's not going to be like some sudden huge difference. It's going to be gradual. And so we really don't notice how it gets injected and to what degree is what you're saying, right? It just keeps getting better, but we don't notice that point when it's getting better that AGI slipped in.
Exactly. We're past the event horizon, right? We cannot escape the gravity of the black hole, but looking out, we can still see the light coming at us. So
that was a definitely nerdy explanation.
There's no, I mean, the genie's out of the bottle, right? The toothpaste is out of the tube. There's no getting it back in there. And I'm not one of these doomsday guys. It's not the Terminator. It's not the Matrix. I think that meaningful changes in work, life, society, etc., are coming because of AI. I can see it. It's adjusting the human mind to be able to harness that and to be able to work with that in the future. I think that's going to take a little time, because I think there's a lot of people who look at AI and they say, great, it's a new way to get more stuff done. That way we can have more because we want more, because we need more, because more is the answer, and more, more, more. I don't personally feel that way. And I think there's a lot of people who don't feel that way. So I can see why there's some people who are just hard charging and go take it out. And there's other people who are like, I don't need any of that in my life, right? The truth, the way to implement it and the way for it to benefit all of us is probably somewhere in the middle. And I think we'll find it. I think there'll be rough patches. There always is. But I think we'll find it. I think it's a great thing for humans as a whole.
Now, should I ask you to say more about that or not?
It's a phenomenon that I bumped into, in a difficult manner very early on in my career. I made some money and it was more, 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 more,
Yeah,
more.
right. Exactly.
That didn't,
Then
that
you get
didn't.
on a treadmill.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think a lot of people are already thinking on that treadmill mentality. But I really don't. I, I envision a future where every single one of us has some level of AI agent that helps us throughout our day and does a lot of the stuff that we currently do. And it can do it in a quarter of the time and 3 times as effective. And in my mind, that's not a reason to get excited about trying to go get more. That gives me an idea of, wow, I've got more, I need more right now. I've got more time to enjoy the quality of my life.
Right.
And if I don't have high quality in my life, well, now I've got some time to go figure out how to make that happen. So,
That's a great note to end that one on.
and
How about the philosophical side of things here?
yeah. So the last one that caught my attention here, and it feeds into what we were just talking about a little bit too, just kind of, we'll call that happenstance, is I read an article that said that 2025 will be the new skill amongst AI dominance will be what they're calling intellectual honesty. And I thought that whenever I see anything that has anything to do with the word honesty or honest, it catches my attention, because the societal definition of what that means is, right, we've got to, you'd think it'd be, what does Webster's dictionary say the definition for honest is? I don't even know.
Well,
Um,
it's not just societal, it's person to person.
Person to person, or person to group, group to group, right?
Right,
How
yeah,
to
right, exactly.
those parameters. So here's how they define intellectual honesty, and I thought it was interesting. It's a commitment to grounded, evidence-based ideation, analysis, and communication. So what caught my attention there is that it's evidence-based.
So what
And
do
I,
they mean? All right, so just before you go further and explain evidence-based, they said grounded in front of that. Do they mean grounded? Is that they're using that as another word for evidence-based, or what does grounded mean?
I think grounded, and again, potentially in the article, what I was able to kind of distill or discern from it is that right now it feels like we're living in a time, and anybody who's ever been on social media, what I recommend is don't go on social media
I'll
for
go on social
a
media,
month,
right?
3 months, a year, whatever, and then go back, because the changes in between when you saw it last and when you see it next, as the longer that period of time is, the more. So I unplugged from social media about 18 months ago. And just in the last 3 or 4 months, I've been back on a little bit, primarily to help promote this and some of the other stuff that I'm doing, using it as a tool rather than a hobby or a time killer, whatever you want to call it, a recreation. And what I've noticed is that the things that my Facebook ads were getting flagged for 3 years ago are rampant now. The things that the algorithm decides to show me on social media now, the claims, the verbiage, the pictures that get through, it is all outrageously different in my mind than what I remember it being just 36 short months ago. So when I heard a commitment to grounded evidence-based information, it led me to, okay, the superfluous claims, that's not intellectual honesty. Backing up what you say with data and being able to prove and show that, that's intellectual honesty. Being able to analyze information and communicate what's really in that analysis. So it brings me back to 15 years ago, I was building enterprise data warehouses for insurance companies. And one of the first questions that I would ask whomever was in charge of that initiative, usually the CEO or CFO, after building a couple of them with my team, it became clear that those gentlemen were divided in two camps. They were the guys who wanted to know what the data told them and were looking for pure data analysis. They didn't know, and that's why they were performing these operations. Or the gentlemen who didn't care what the data said, they just wanted to twist it so that it matched their predictions. And that's where intellectual honesty splits in my mind. You've got the camp of people who are looking for little tidbits of data or information to prove their point. And then you're looking for people who are kind of truth seekers. And intellectual honesty to me, in my world, means you may not like my answer, but here's what we found. And here's how we can use it appropriately. And I agree with them that there's this kind of close-minded, I'm going to bend and twist everything to match what I want, versus let's find out what it says and then react from there, build from there.
Reminds me of a cartoon. I've got to find it because I've been referring to it a lot lately. But it was a stage. There's an MC up there, and there were several seats on the stage, and in the seats were digits. Like there was a 3 in one chair, a 5 in another chair, a 9 in another chair, right? So there were a number of digits there. And so the MC is saying, tonight, we're going to let the numbers speak for themselves.
Well, you know what? If we ignored last month and we only highlight, the data that's coming through in top line rev, we can make it look, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Those days are thankfully in my rearview mirror. But and I'll say this, there were times when I was unpopular with some of those folks because the data is what the data is. And instead of looking at it from an opportunity to improve, they looked at it from an opportunity to, or they looked at it more from a standpoint of now they're missing an opportunity. They wanted the result to be a particular way.
Or something to hide, right?
Yeah, exactly. So transparent thinking, the ability to move quickly, the ability to be honest about data, to produce good results. All of that came from that article. Very intriguing. If anybody's interested in more details on it, if you look up intellectual honesty, I'm sure you'll get to the article that I found. I want to say that came from inc.com, inc.com. So
Any closing thoughts for this week?
Wishing everybody the best on this Veterans Day. Any veterans out there, thank you very much for your service. Very appreciative for all of that you've done for our country, regardless of whether we agree with leadership or not, or voting or not, or none of that has anything to do with you. You honor us, and I appreciate you very much.
Great. And with that, thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next week on